If you're thinking about coming out to California, there are some real things that you need to know before you make your move. We're gonna tackle a few misconceptions that people from outside of California pretty much just have these thoughts about that really aren't true. Some of them are, but not all of them. So let's dive right in. Very first thing, and you probably have some idea of this, is just the overwhelming cost of living that comes with living here in California. Right now, the median price of a home is well over $800,000. Of course, that depends where you are living in California. If you're right on the coast, it's actually going to be way more than that. And then if you're inland, it'll be more affordable. But I'm pretty much willing to bet that wherever you're coming from, the cost of living here in California is going to be more. Right? If you're renting, on average, the amount of rent you'll be paying per month is well over $2,500. And then another huge one is how much gas costs in California. We get taxed really hard when we're at the pump buying our gas. It is always well above the national average. So be prepared to be kind of breaking the bank at the pump when you are filling up. Now, there are a couple of things as far as other taxes that we do need to clear up. I think California gets a bad rap for the most part in terms of taxes, but there's one that is a common misconception that we'll clear up in just a second here. Depending on where you're coming from, another thing that you really need to get used to is the amount of traffic that you'll be experiencing living here in, whether you're in Northern California or in Southern California. Here in California, I would say, 95% of people are traveling around town, around their neck of the woods by car. Pretty much everybody has their own car. There are, public transportation, there are buses and of course Uber and Lyft and all that, but for the most part, people are driving themselves around to get stuff done. And for that reason, traffic is just one of those things that you need to get used to. Always pay attention to when you are leaving. Never advise somebody to be leaving at peak rush hour times. Try to get there early. Or if a lot of times it makes sense just to hang around later, leave later, and you'll be in your car a whole lot less than sitting in traffic. So one thing you should always do, even if you know where you're going, always plug in your GPS to Waze or Google Maps or whatever you use. But there could be some better ways to get from point A to point B. But traffic is definitely a huge concern living in especially Southern California. There are new homes continuing to be built in all these brand new communities, which is great if you're looking for a brand new home, but it just means that more and more people are moving here and traffic is getting worse and worse. So definitely pay attention to when you are traveling and the best times you should be leaving and going places. Now, there is another part of that traffic piece that we're going to touch on in just a second here, where here in California, people just kind of go berserk when it happens. So you definitely need to be fair warned when that happens. I'll let you know what that is in just a couple minutes. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is taxes, right? Now, for the most part, I would say, California gets a pretty bad rap for the amount of taxes that Californians have to pay. And income tax isn't great here. If you're coming from Texas or Florida or Washington, if you're not used to paying income tax, that might be kind of hard to sign up for, right? I think a lot of us, right, are pretty much just used to having income tax. Sales tax here, it's at minimum at 7.25. Depends on what city you live in. It could be up to 10.25. So that is also something that you kind of have to deal with. But perhaps the biggest misconception talking taxes is your property tax here in California. Now, I would venture to guess that if I asked you let's just take 4 states. Let's take California, let's take New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Of those 4 states, which do you think has the highest property tax rate? Go ahead and put it in the comments. Now, I'm willing to guess that you got that one wrong. I would think a lot of people would put California or perhaps New York or maybe even Pennsylvania. But the truth is Texas actually has the highest property tax rate of those 4 states. Now, Texas doesn't have any income tax, right? So the citizens definitely enjoy that there, I'd say. But when it comes to property tax, it's not so bad in California, right? There are only 18 other states that have lower property tax rates than what Californians enjoy. So I hope we can kind of clear the air on that. If you're buying property here in California, it actually could be a lot worse than if you were buying in other states. As far as the other taxes, yeah, like if you have your own business, there's a 8.25% tax on net income. So you're gonna get hit there. You know, I've heard of people operating or headquartering their businesses in other states, even though they live in California. But I would think that your property tax is probably gonna be your biggest tax bill, and it's actually not so bad living here in California. All right, moving right along. Let's get into, actually, before we go any further, please, if you would, go ahead and hit that like button if you've enjoyed the video so far. I'd really appreciate it. It would help support my channel. All right, now let's get into the next thing you really should know about if you are thinking about coming out to California, and that is the weather, right? And you know, what do most people think of when they think about California and the weather? People would say it's always beautiful, 75 degrees and sunny. Well, that's just not the case. Now, most of the time, you know, the weather is, you know, fairly good, and we can pretty much be outdoors year round. It's not like living in the Midwest in Illinois or Wisconsin or Minnesota or something like that. But, you know, we definitely still have seasons, right? It gets really hot, depending on where you are, of course. If you're at the coast, the heat isn't gonna bother you so much. You know, it might hit like 80, and that's really hot if you're right on the coast for here in Southern California. But if you are inland, there's definitely gonna be at least, you know, a few weeks, months, maybe a couple, 2-3 months, depending on where you are, where the heat is just unbearable. So you pretty much gotta stick up with, you know, July, August, September, sometimes even into October, with the heat getting really bad before we can really enjoy, you know, the California weather, you know, from November, I'd say, all the way through February and March. I would say that's like our peak weather season, right? You know, it gets cold sometimes, you know, around here, I would say the coldest it would get would probably be like low 40s, would be like a pretty cold day, but it always seems to warm back up pretty quick. It's definitely a net positive, but you know, it's not always 75 degrees and sunny. One thing that you do need to be aware of is traffic when it rains, right? Now, California has had to deal with a lot of droughts in recent, you know, I'd say a couple of decades, but when it actually does rain, Californians kind of freak out and pretty much don't know how to drive in the rain. There are lots of accidents. People don't really slow down, I'd say, or just in general, they're just not that good drivers in the rain. Perhaps, you know, we don't change our windshield wipers enough, stuff like that, or, you know, we don't have the proper experience to know how to drive in weather. So when it does happen, just kind of put your guard up, be careful out there. Traffic does get a little squirrely when it does start to rain, so be aware. Now, another thing that you do need to be aware of if you're coming out to California and you're just not used to it is just the amount of potential natural disasters that we have. Now, unfortunately, we pretty much have, I would say, a wildfire season. You know, Wildfires are happening every year. It just kind of depends how close they're happening to you. We are in Southern California here in Redlands. So we're surrounded by San Bernardino Mountains, San Mateo Canyon. And so a couple have popped up here and there where, some residents out in our neck of the woods are forced to evacuate. So it really depends where they're happening, but it's definitely just a way of life. You'll have to deal with the smoke and the ashes depending on where the wind is coming and going. It could definitely be affecting where you live. Now, the other big potential natural disaster living here in California is, of course, earthquakes. Often we get, small-ish ones. You kind of feel some, like we had one just a couple weeks ago, kind of a roller that was fairly big. I mean, I think it was like close to like a 5.0, but it was centered pretty close to where we're located. But California definitely, has the San Andreas fault line. So it's definitely a thing where buildings have to be retrofitted or equipped to be, earthquake friendly. So we don't know when the next big one is coming, but that's definitely something that you deal with living here in California. Our schools every single year go through earthquake drills, as well as, other government's offices and companies and whatnot. So if you're, let's say coming from the Midwest and you're used to natural disasters, perhaps like tornadoes or things like that, it's just a little bit different, right? We don't really have tornadoes here, but we have the potential for earthquakes. And if you're not used to it, you probably need to be just given a quick heads up about what could happen, right? You actually can't buy a home in the state of California without earthquake insurance. So definitely something to know about. Now, another thing you need to know about if you're coming out to California is just the amount of immense diversity that you're going to be experiencing here, whether it's in Southern California or Northern California. California is a huge state, right? It's almost like Southern California and Northern California are always kind of like two separate states. We have family that live up in Northern California. It's like a 6-hour drive, depending on where you're going or more. But like to the Bay Area, that kind of general region down to Southern California is about a 6-hour drive. Experience people from all different walks of life. California has so much to offer just in terms of its, geographic diversity as well. We have, beaches, we have mountains, the desert, we have lakes, like all kinds of outdoor, options. And that brings people from all over the world to live here in California. Not only that, we have all kinds of career options here in California, all kinds of educational options. So there's definitely not a day where you'll go without running into people who definitely do not look like you. So if you're coming from somewhere else that's different in that way, definitely prepare yourself to meet some people from all kinds of walks of life. Okay, so there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you want to learn even more about living here in California, or specifically about Redlands, go ahead and click this video and we'll see you next time.